history privileges the status quo. The Belton timeline included one Nova Scotian woman artist active during the 19th century. The CWAHI database introduces 7 more, and its files name another 9. Our preliminary list for an exhibition of work by early Nova Scotian women artists considered the connections among 30 professional and amateur artists for whom locally available works had been identified. The names of another 62 were known from exhibition catalogs. Searching for them produced limited results, but revealed some new artists and works in the process. So our final exhibition list leaves us with 61 works by 28 artists and many questions. Since the earliest women teachers in Halifax, who included drawing in their curricula, left no tangible evidence of their presence beyond newspaper notices, our relevant art history begins with Eliza Wilson Brooks Thresher, the first professional woman artist to come to Nova Scotia, who announced her Select Drawing and Painting Academy in February 1821. Her suite of 10 landscape paintings illustrating Alan Ramsay's The Gentle Shepherd proclaimed her skill in oil painting, but she also offered instruction in figures, flowers, and fancy ornaments in chalk, crayon, distemper, and watercolors. Harry Peers had cited a J.E. Akers newspaper notice for flower painting in his Artists of Nova Scotia paper in 1914. So the assumption since then has been that Akers instructed Mariah Morris. In that paper, however, Peers referred to an apparent dearth of artistic activity in the 1820s because he hadn't reviewed all the newspapers. Thresher's repeated notices during that decade thus escaped attention. She is more likely to have been Morris's teacher, especially since the final location for her school was on Salter Street, where Morris and her mother would open the school in May 1831. Thresher and her husband would move to Pictou in 1828 and to Charlottetown a year later, where she continued to teach, and he became a government bureaucrat in 1838. Confusion surrounds Mariah Morris's early career because her second cousins, Mary Eleanor and Betsy, or Elizabeth Morris, also studied and exhibited with William Harris Jones and also operated a school with their widowed mother. Jones must have struggled with social niceties when preparing the catalogue for his 1831 exhibition, which included works by Miss M. Morris, Miss E. Morris, and Miss Morris. M. Morris would be Mariah, whose painting of the waterfall at Tivoli was later included in the 1848 exhibition at the Drill Hall when she was Mrs. Miller. E. Morris would be Betsy Elizabeth, and Miss Morris would be Mary Eleanor as the eldest daughter of the late Alexander. Thus, in December 1831, Mrs. Sibylla Morris informed the public that her daughter, Miss Mariah Morris, late a pupil of Mr. W.H. Jones, would recommence her drawing and painting school at their new location behind the National School. And in August 1833, Mary Eleanor informed prospective students that she had availed herself of the instructions of an eminent professor for the past 9 months, meaning the English artist Lestrange, who taught a simplified style of flower painting, which she would continue to teach at her residence next to and on the south side of the Acadian School, where she had operated since September 1830. Sadly, no work by either Mary Eleanor nor her sister survives, although they should also be considered professional teachers. Neither could we locate paintings by the remaining 16 women artists in the Jones exhibition. From her exhibition records, we know that Mariah Morris, our first native-born professional woman artist, painted Mi'kmaq subjects, so it is reasonable, though not yet documented, to consider Mary R. McKee, our second, who made a specialty of such, a product of her school. McKee taught drawing in Halifax, filling the gap left by Mariah Morris's hiatus from teaching upon her marriage to Garrett Miller and moved to Bridgewater in 1840. By 1861, when McKee had moved to England, where she listed her occupation as artist on the census. Morris Miller was again teaching in Halifax. Based on similarity of subjects, McKee probably taught Elizabeth Saunders Latz, who is also documented as painting floral subjects, though none were located. McKee taught Margaret Wiseman Stairs, the mother of Frances Jones, which provides a tentative, though tenuous, connection between Nova Scotia's first professional woman artist and one of our most outstanding, since Jones's paintings in Paris and Fontevin in the early 1880s show her to have been Canada's first Impressionist artist. Another of W.H. Jones's students exhibiting to much acclaim in both his exhibitions was Alicia Ann Jeffrey, an age mate of Mariah Morris, whose name, like hers, remained current largely because one painting was redrawn as a lithograph by B.F. Nutting for issue by Clement H. Belcher in Halifax in 1836, and another for publication in a book by Abraham Gesner. Marriage in 1837 removed Jeffrey from Halifax the following year. John Sparrow Thompson noted in the Colonial Pearl in 1839 that Mariah Morris had obtained a large list of subscribers for the publication of Wildflowers of Nova Scotia as lithographs. Pearce commented that the venture was a financial failure, without citing a reason for his conclusion. He may not have understood the operation of the print business, which required the artist or agent to sell subscriptions to purchase a series of prints in order to finance the printing. She therefore could not have lost financially on the project, which explains her continuation of the series in 1853 and 1866, and a reissue of the first set in 1867. Perhaps pride in their connection to Canada's first native-born botanical artist ensured that artists later in the century would continue to find inspiration in the flora of the province. Although Mariah Morris did not send work to William Egar's 1838 exhibition, both her cousin Mary Eleanor and Ellen Nutting studied at his drawing academy and had their work displayed. We could locate neither paintings nor photographs by Jane Carroll, another of Egar's students, who opened a school in 1833 and a daguerreotype studio in 1852. And for the most part, the other 14 women in that exhibition exist today as names only. Nutting's sketch of a young lady from the exhibition has not survived, but may have been similar to those in an extant sketchbook begun in 1842. Mary Creighton had been one of Jones's students in 1831. Portraits of Margaret Tobin, another Jones student, and Amelia Alman Ritchie, who had studied with both teachers, are also included in the sketchbook. Of the 18 women artists in the 1848 Mechanics Institute exhibition, only works by Mariah Morris, by then Mrs. Miller, and Mary McKee can be located today. Likewise, the McKee and Miller names appear again in the 1854 Industrial Exhibition and the 1863 exhibition at the Drill Hall. That their importance continued to be recognized is perhaps an indication of professional status in the public mind. The 1854 exhibition offered a new departure, for it included a category of prizes for Mi'kmaq artists, two of which were won by the mother and sister of Madeline Thomas Williams, whose quill work box is among the rare ones that can be identified with a particular artist. Madeline herself may have been one of the Mary Thomas family, whose work was included in the 1865 Dublin Exposition and presented by the province to the Lord Lieutenant's wife. Since quill work, basketry, and beadwork provided their livelihood, these Mi'kmaq artists must also be considered professional artists. In the absence of real information, the other 48 artists from the 31, 38, and 48 exhibitions must be considered amateurs. But that category does not necessarily preclude skill. Although the records they drew in 1797 and 1859 certainly suggest that Maria Massin and Jessie McPherson were mainly self-taught in isolation, and her choice of medium places Eleanor Whiston's birch bark, lichen, moss, and watercolor pictures outside the mainstream. It is only their choice not to continue in the field that makes Elizabeth Wiswell a student of Mariah Morris Miller, or Isabella McDougall, one of Egar's pupils, amateurs. Elizabeth Lads is always described as an amateur, but a newspaper review in 1884 mentions exhibitions in Boston, so further investigation may reveal her to have been more serious. Annie Mackenzie Bruce may have studied with Anna Lucia Kelly, who had opened a painting school in nearby Yarmouth by 1879, though Kelly's primary interest was china painting. Relatively isolated in Shelburne, Bruce was an amateur, but of sufficient seriousness to have inspired her daughter to pursue a professional career in the States. What are thus far one-off works suggest that Mary Louise Colback and Emily Meserve Peyton remained amateurs. Timing and location suggest that they were students of Forchaudet, who taught painting in Halifax between 1862 and 1879. But the Ladies' Seminary in Wolfville began offering art training the following year. The development of railways after mid-century had permitted increased travel from central Canada. The Peyton family had prior connections in Ontario and Detroit, so the possibility for Emily Peyton's training in theory are much wider, but her name does not appear in earlier records. Mary Ellen Thompson, Joe Howe's granddaughter, and Kate Foss Hill also probably studied with Forchaudet before the latter left for study in France in the 1870s. Hill later taught drawing at the Halifax Academy, opened in 1879, and the Victoria School of Art and Design between 1891 and 93, before continued studies in New York and Paris. Except for Eliza Tremaine Harding, who began teaching at the seminary in Wolfville in 1879, but left for study in Germany in 1888. My file on teachers there remains almost empty, but as a china, landscape, and flower painter, she is typical of Nova Scotian women artists in the latter 19th century. Obscurity also surrounds the New Brunswick-born Edith Smith, who had trained under Walter Smith at the Massachusetts Normal Art School and taught drawing at the Provincial Normal School from the early 1880s until 1914, since drawing was by then part of the public school curriculum. The Victoria School of Art and Design, now NASCAD University, and the Halifax Ladies College, now Armbray, both opened in 1887. Clara Frances Howard was appointed the first art teacher at the Ladies College. She later established herself as a miniature portrait painter in New York. Florence M. Rogers, wife of a doctor in the city who identified herself as artist in the city directories, Kate Foss Hill and Edith Smith also taught art classes at the Ladies College. Whether Rogers is identical with the Florence M. Rogers active in 1879 in Ontario remains to be determined. Frances Jones began studies in France in 1878 and was the first Nova Scotian to have work accepted by the official salon in 1883, and had been the first female associate of the Royal Canadian Academy in 1881, elected after the Marquess of Lorne purchased one of her paintings. Though she remained in Europe, her paintings in Halifax did provide inspiration to those who followed. After initial studies at the VSAD under George Harvey, and later at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and with Henry Rosenberg at the VSAD, Una Gray, like Frances Jones before her, moved to Europe to pursue a professional career, with regular acceptance by the various salons. Alice Egan was Rosenberg's first appointment to his staff in 1898 to teach china painting, but she practiced painting and drawing with Gray, who re-enrolled the following year. Since the contents of Gray's studio were lost during her internment by the Nazis, few works are known on which to judge her work, and Egar's later renown as a ceramist has obscured her earlier painting career. Rosenberg had succeeded Catherine Norcross Evans as principal of the VSAD, And it was she who had introduced China painting to the college curriculum, having studied with Madame Hortense Richard in Paris. The delicacy of Egan's self-portrait on porcelain recommends a connection to Richard through Evan's tutelage, but traditionally Bessie Brown is cited as Egan's teacher in China painting, although Matilda Crane also taught the craft in the city between 1880 and 1888. Neither Brown nor Evans contributed to the Catholic Commemorative State Dinner Service commissioned by the Women's Art Association of Canada in 1896. But Alice Egan produced a dozen game plates decorated with wild birds, and Anna Lucia Kelly a dozen cups and saucers with wild flowers of the province. Plants and flowers inspired personal porcelain designs by Egan and Kelly, as well as by Brown and Harding. The flora of the province continued equally attractive in the traditional medium of watercolor. Annie Louisa Pratt initiated a lifelong devotion to botanical drawing in the early 1880s. And Edith Smith produced a suite of these drawings before she left for study in Boston in 1892. Both of them inspired, no doubt, by the Mariah Morris lithographs, which could still be found in many Nova Scotian households. Pratt also painted miniature portraits in Wolfville between 1883 and 1918, and in New York between 1897 and 1903. By the end of the century, the number of women artists active in the province had increased greatly. No longer content to learn what they could from visiting teachers, many left for study in Europe or the US. From the small beginnings on Salter Street, the path laid out by Eliza Thresher and Mariah Morris had become a well-trodden road. But there is so much we don't know. Are the drawing teachers earlier than Eliza Thresher totally lost to us now? How secure is the teaching line of descent from Eliza Thresher? Are there more Thresher paintings to be identified? Since Mariah Morris offered to teach oil painting, are there oils by her to be identified? Does an anonymous inscription mask work by the other Morris sisters? Can work by the 4 dozen other exhibiting women artists in the 1830s and 40s be located? Can we rescue Mi'kmaq artists from anonymity? Does the relative dearth of acknowledged artists in the third quarter of the century reflect the imposition of so-called Victorian values, or the disruptive effect of London Art Union's marketing? And what offset this in the fourth quarter? Does a public declaration of artist status in census or directories constitute professional commitment? What was the outreach of the Women's Art Association before Mary Dignam's 1905 Halifax visit to locate China painters in 1896? And where did the Nova Scotian China painters study? What is the teaching legacy of the Ladies' Seminary at Wolfville, the Normal School at Truro, and the Halifax Ladies' College? No one will dispute the limitations of the old timeline, but neither can CWAHI's current list produce a true picture of the community of women artists that existed across time in any particular locale, because too many linkages are missing. How much would the still hidden links limit the validity of a new history of women and art in Canada?